Вітаю, шановні друзі! Мене звати Павло Федорченко-Кутуєв. Я маю честь представляти кафедру соціології, факультету соціології та права Київської політехніки. І сьогодні у співпраці з Українсько-Японським центром Київського політехнічного інституту ми маємо честь і приємність представити лекцію професора Хідеакі Шінода. Професор Шінода працює в Токійському університеті міжнародних студій. Він отримав свій PhD з Лондонської школи економіки, і він є автором численних книжок з міжнародних відносин, міжнародних конфліктів. Він виховав не одне покоління японських дипломатів та співробітників міжнародних організацій. Сьогоднішня лекція на сумну і трагічну тему, а саме досвід Японії та Хірошіми, досвід повоєнного відновлення. Безумовно, тема надзвичайно актуальна в світлі російської військової агресії проти нашої країни. Але нам необхідно вчитися на досвіді інших країн, для того, щоб руїну перетворити на диво. Японія змогла це зробити, і, безумовно, Україна зможе стати автором українського дива. Передаю слово професору Шінода. Дякую.
Вітаю, шановні друзі. Маю честь представитися. Мене звати Павло Федорченко-Кутуєв, і я представник кафедри соціології, факультету соціології і права Київського політехнічного інституту імені Ігоря Сікорського. І сьогодні, повторюся, в нас велетенська честь і привілей бути господарями надзвичайно цікавої і корисної події, а саме лекції професора Хідеакі Шінода, професора Токійського університету міжнародних студій, знаного науковця, міжнародника, фахівця з врегулювання конфліктів. І професор Шінода сьогодні буде розповідати про досвід повоєнного відновлення Японії з особливою увагою до міста Хірошіми, одного з двох міст, яке пережило атомне бомбардування. Дякую всім, хто приєдналися. Безумовно, найбільша вдячність професору Шіноді. І я певен, ми всі отримаємо дуже багато цікавої, корисної інформації. Дякую ще раз. Професор Шінода, the floor is yours. Welcome and thank you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Pablo, and thank you very much for the entire audience, all of you, for coming to this occasion. This is a great, wonderful occasion for me to be engaged with you. Well, second time through this channel. Today, I would like to talk about very interesting, exciting topic for all of us, like reconstruction, peace building process of Japan, as well as its local city, Hiroshima. I selected this topic for today because of our general interest in overall history of Japan's reconstruction, Hiroshima's very distinctive history of reconstruction and so on. But that history was quite dramatically highlighted 2 weeks ago at the time of G7 Hiroshima Summit. It was not just because many people, including mass media, journalists, gathered in Hiroshima to report the discussions by G7 leaders. But it was because Prime Minister Kishida, whose constituency is actually the first district of Hiroshima, covering the Peace Memorial Park area, he wanted to highlight the significance of Hiroshima in the context of international affairs in 2022-23. So, in addition to official G7 members as well as official invitees, President Zelensky showed up in Hiroshima all of a sudden without the notification to meet all these G7 leaders. Well, in addition to plenary meeting, as well as individual meetings with most of the leaders who gathered in Hiroshima. So the legacy of Hiroshima was highlighted by the conference itself as well, and most dramatically, the arrival of President Zelensky. So this is a very much great opportunity for all of us, especially for me, who has emotional attachments to the legacy of Hiroshima, working in Hiroshima for many years. And I hope this is a significant timing for us to organize this kind of event after the G7 summit meeting in Hiroshima, with a very fresh memory of President Zelensky making some remarks about Hiroshima, like the scene of Hiroshima 78 years ago reminded him of the scene in Bakhmut, or some of the areas in Ukraine, and scenes in contemporary Hiroshima, as well as people on the street waving national flags of Ukraine to greet President Zelensky. This scene gave him some kind of hope, or he used the word dream of reconstruction of Ukraine. That was very much moving moment for Japanese too. Or if our history has some kind of meaning for many people outside of Japan, of course, that would be so much wonderful. So by asking this kind of question, if Japan is now a peaceful country, how has it become such a country? If Hiroshima symbolizes some kind of meaning for many people in the world, how is it so? There are many human stories. It's not an automatic, accidental event that Hiroshima became a symbolic city in Japan. Now, Japan is a peaceful country, or in a sense, at least, like 78 years, we haven't been engaged with war, very luckily. There are some, perhaps, good timing, luck. Doesn't mean that we will not have any war in the near future, long period of time, but at least the fact that we haven't been engaged with the war for 78 years is a significant fact. That is an achievement of many people who aspire to make Japan such a country. It was not an automatic, accidental event. Since prior to the last war, which Japan experienced, there are so many wars being engaged with Japan, and many tensions, turmoil, problems within and outside of Japan. So because of these problems, or despite these problems, our ancestors made some efforts to make this country somewhat better and make Hiroshima a symbol of Japanese achievement. I will never pretend that Hiroshima's case or Japan's case can be learned as a role model. There are many special occasions, conditions, distinctive ideas, so it's just impossible to imitate. Not just the case of Japan or Hiroshima, imitate any kind of samples, because each country, each city has its own distinctive historical background, political conditions, and so on. No two totally identical cases of reconstruction, even out of the contemporary samples. But all the more because we would like to get to know samples, as many samples as possible. We would like to learn something out of the past events, because in the end, because there is no identical example, we need to take some lessons out of some some cases, some other lessons out of some other cases, and in a combined manner, we will come up with new ideas in order to confront new challenges. I would highlight these human, personal issues, human issues, like visions, leadership, exerted by some people in history, let's say in the history of Japan or Hiroshima, in order to consolidate peace through consolidation of pride and respect of people who are concerned in the process of reconstruction, peace building. These efforts are quite stimulating. I hope that we are always able to learn something from others' guides, samples, examples, efforts, because these issues are very universal. However, the way we apply them should differ each time. So we just continue to learn and learn in order to confront the new tasks, new challenges, but I hope that Japan or Hiroshima could offer one of such critical cases. I am very much willing to accept your ideas, questions. I understand that this lecture is now being broadcast on the YouTube, so in a lively manner. So if you send questions, we are able to read it, accept it, before we close this session. So roughly speaking, I'm going to deliver this kind of lecture style talk, spanning 60 minutes or so, and the remaining 30 minutes should be kept for questions and answers. Please ask any questions through the channel of YouTube or any other possible channels. Hopefully, mainly today, it seems that your questions comes through YouTube comments. So I try to read them after my talk, and then staff members like Professor Pavlo will help us take these comments later. And now, let me go back to my substantive topic. I said that some of the thematic issues like visions, leadership, how to promote pride and respect among people, after they might have lost some kind of confidence in rebuilding society and so on. It's a universal topic. However, each case has its own distinctive background, context. Perhaps this way of thinking can be interpreted in this way. Some of the points, like a way of thinking, can be applicable across many regions, many cases. However, the contents ought to be very distinctive, very much original. Like, very basic idea, like in order for us to achieve the goal, we have to set up the goal. In order for us to set up the goal, we have to know what should be our goal. Sometimes ordinary people may not have a full understanding of their goal, but even in such a case, leaders need to navigate ordinary people by introducing some specific policies with very clear intentions, so that we can go together, even if some people may not fully understand the overall context. Put it very simply or generally, if we feel that we have lost peace, we would like to set up the goal of peace, rebuilding peace. Coming from the original point of the absence of peace, if we generalize the structure of the problem, perhaps we could apply this diagram to many, many, many cases, almost universally. So let's start with this kind of general descriptions. The point is, if we set up the goal because our current status has not yet achieved this goal, there must be a process for us to get closer to our goal. After we start with the point where we haven't achieved our goal. What is that process? It is called peace building process, building peace process. The assumption is that our goal is peace and that we haven't achieved it yet. That applies to contemporary Japan too. I said that we are not engaged with any war at this moment, though I never pretend that Japan is a perfect, peaceful society. So many problems and so many potential tensions and conflicts. So we need to handle them one by one. Otherwise, we fall into a trap of the opposite process of going to the absence of war in the future. But anyway, if we would like to achieve our goal, which is, let's say, peace, we have to know what kind of process we need to introduce and we need to organize. That is the task of policymakers, leaders who are responsible for implementing policies. First, we need to analyze the situation. Analysis comes first. Well, what should be the goal? Well, peace is the goal, but what kind of peace? G7 summit meeting talked about just and lasting peace. This particular type of comprehensive just and lasting peace. The reason why G7 leaders wanted to declare that they would like to achieve this peace for Ukraine together with the Ukrainian people, it is because there are some other people who may not share this idea of peace and propagate some other forms of peace. We are aware of it. So we need to have discussions. But in the end, if we fix our policy, we need to be conscious of our decision, ranging from the very fundamental point, like what kind of peace we would like to achieve. What is our goal? And then our goal setting must come from our analysis. Because of our analysis of the current situation, this must be our goal. And this doesn't have to be our goal. Something like that. These decisions always have to be based on our analysis of the current situation as well as future analysis of the future and so on. And of course, why do we lack this goal at this moment? Our analysis of the current situation, which consists of many problems that hinder us from achieving our goal, the problem must be analyzed very carefully. And as a result, we need to visualize the process. It is called, a bit more specifically, planning. We need to have a plan to achieve our goal. If we get the plan and then refine the plan, we have to implement it. Usually, if the plan is sound, we should be able to achieve something, though it's not very likely that in 2-3 years we will achieve everything because we are human beings. We don't know 80% or 60%. There are some achievements as well as room for further improvement at the end of one implementation cycle. And then we monitor, evaluate, and assess the results. And we are going to organize one more round of this kind of cycle, sub-cycle, minor cycle, 1 year cycle, 3 year cycle, and then accumulation of these cycles should lead us to get closer to our fundamental goal. So I hope, I'm sorry that I spent time talking about general stuff, but this is the context of my today's talk about Japan. I'm a professor at the university, but I'm also the director of the organization called Hiroshima Peace Builders Center. And HPC is implementing the project on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. which means that we annually hold multiple training courses for basically Japanese as well as non-Japanese who aspire to become UN officials for peacebuilding, or active UN officials who promote their careers more professionally and so on. Last year, that means last fiscal year, that means that January, February this year, we had one Ukrainian participant in our one of our training courses called the primary course. She appeared in the videotape government of Japan prepared for the G7 summit under the title of a promotion of the rule of law for better international order and something like that. So we really thank her contribution. And then I'm sure the government of Japan appreciates her contribution too. But anyway, through these training courses, in order to train for professional or potential professional people, we conduct very practical exercises. But our policy is to go through the process of actual professional work, like starting from analysis, and then we make a plan and try to implement it through enhancing coordination skills. And then we talk about how to monitor, evaluate, and assess our achievements and so on. The initial week should be devoted to analysis, tree model analysis, stakeholder mapping, and so on. We do so for JICA or other civil society organization in Africa and so on. And so I apply the same kind of way of thinking in different ways, in different places for different people, but still the way of thinking is the same. We would like to have a goal that we would like to achieve. In order for us to do that, we analyze the situation, make a plan, and then implement it. After that, we will assess it. I will talk about history of Japan as the case of multiple processes of such peace-building oriented cycles. Japan, I said that Japan is now a peaceful country, but it was full of wars before 19th century or up to the end of 19th century. Well, if we look at the hundreds of the history of Japan, it's really full of wars. Among warlords, Japan used to be divided very seriously into several regions as a result of confrontations between warlords. If Japan maintained a relative stability, it was because the strongest warlord won the final battles against the other stronger warlords, something like that. That is called the samurai period. But let me focus on the modern history of Japan. In order to simplify the process, the talk, I would like to highlight two cycles of Japan's peace-building process. The very famous one is the second round, which started in 1945 after the Second World War. As I said, since that time, we haven't been engaged with any visible wars. But this was a process of improvement, rectification of the first modern round of peace building in Japan, which started in the 19th century, like a revolution time, like 1868. At each stage, leaders recognized and analyzed the problems in front of them, and then they came up with a plan to achieve their goal, like peaceful Japan, and they made some achievements while keeping some room for further improvements till now. They had different problems. Therefore, they introduced different policies while tackling the issues in the same country. As a national narrative, national history, Japan has a coherent history of peacebuilding, which consists of, let's say, two major processes, stages of the process of peacebuilding, even in just the modern history. Japan's first round of peacebuilding process started with the advent of imperial powers. The first major arrival was from the United States. There are some other minor cases, but the U.S. really showed warships to blackmail Japan so that it opened the market for American trades. Very likely, Americans who arrived in 1853, middle of the 19th century, 5 years after they reached the Pacific coast as a result of the U.S.-Mexico War. Only 5 years after, they arrived in Japan with warships. But in 1860s, they had to handle their own civil war. And after that, they had to handle their own reconstruction, very big reconstruction of the southern states. So that made them stop in terms of their expansion for 2-3 decades. That gave Japan significant time to prepare for another arrival of Western powers. During that period, Japan had many confrontations, conflicts, turmoil, and then a revolution in the end in 1868 with the young revolutionaries. At that time, traditional samurai government had a stronghold in the northern part of Japan, and the Southwesterners organized revolutionary war. It was a major war as well as a strange war. Some farmers were conscripted and then given the Western military uniform, observing the orders from traditional samurai young revolutionaries and so on. And prior to the revolution in 1863, there were many wars, small wars, as well as major armed confrontations between some factions. And after the revolution, for 10 years, up to 78 or so, there were many small wars. So this was a major period for Japan, for Japan to have many internal wars. Japan was full of internal wars. That was the starting point of the first peace building process. And even among revolutionary guys, there were many confrontations. The most charismatic leader was defeated by another charismatic revolutionary figure, and so on. Although they pretend that they were convinced that they knew each other very well. And so it was full of wars, but they conducted revolution. In the end, even when they had the small internal wars, sometimes they communicated. Why? How? Because they share the same concerns, same threats. And then because of the perception of the same threat, problems, sometimes they say that you must change your policy. No, you should withdraw, something like that. But overall, problem analysis was at some point very much widely shared, like visible problem of threat of colonization. If Japanese were idle, Americans would colonize as they did over Hawaii and the Philippines at the beginning of the 20th century. Or some parts in Chinese continent, if not the entire China, but some parts were colonized, and then the mainland China was in the miserable situation. The British were in Southeast Asia, and the Russians were advancing southward, of course. Very visible threats of colonization against Japan. And of course, in internal domestic society, there was a clear threat of disunity. They recognized these problems and set up the goal to overcome these problems, like building modern nation states to prevent colonization and disruption. How can we achieve this goal? They needed to make a plan to visualize the process to get closer to this goal. Like they said that, well, we have to strengthen international state power as well as internal state unity. Okay, fine. How do we achieve these measures too? And then the more specific ideas like centralization of political power and a strong military and consolidated security sectors for domestic stability, introducing a meritocratic elite system to keep a consolidated state structure, promoting state-led capitalism and industrial promotion. There was no capitalist foundation in Japan, 19th century. State-led capitalism was recognized as necessary measures to promote economy in Japan. So they identified the problem of risk of national collapse, which consisted of a threat of colonization and a threat of domestic disunity. How do they have threat of colonization? Because of lack of sufficient military strength, lack of contact with external power, so that they could not play balance of power international game. Why did they have a threat of domestic disunity? Because they didn't have nationwide value system, no strong central government, and so on. So objective tree is totally the other side of the same tree model. Like the goal setting is no risk of national collapse. That means that the elimination of the threats of colonization and national disunity. How could we achieve these goals? Well, let's have sufficient military strength and have external relationships with other powers to play balance of power game in the region. Nationwide value system, strong central government, all were recognized as necessary measures to achieve the sub-goals as well as the fundamental goal. There are many slogans, mottos to represent the idea of this plan. But in the end, if we explain the process of peace building in the modern first round, the idea was like that kind of tree model. And as in the case of exercises in the training courses for other cases in contemporary world. Today, I would like to spend a few minutes of this history of external war. In the process of overcoming the problem of continuous internal wars, Japan was equipped with strong military power, strong central government, and a balance of power. As a result, consecutive external wars. In this process, they eliminated internal wars. But they continue to have external wars. This is a very typical, simplified manner of achievement of one goal and then the creation of byproduct problem. In that process, there was a Russo-Japanese War after Sino-Japanese War. Why did Japanese fight the Russians at the beginning of the 20th century? It is because of the goals I highlighted. It's a elimination of the threat of colonization. And the Russians were expanding southward, very visible actual threat. And then prior to Russo-Japanese War, there was a war called the Sino-Japanese War, the war between Japan and China. Chinese Empire was a great presence, although they were not very strong, to oust other external powers from Western countries. So Japanese had to make a decision whether they should make an alliance with China or they should confront Western powers directly after they got rid of the Chinese discretion. And they chose the latter. They first fought China in order to oust the Chinese influence over peninsula, Korean peninsula. And the Russians and some other Western powers became more interested in the peninsula as well as some parts in the continent. And then Japanese began to prepare for another war, especially a war against Russia. In order to secure or clear the elements of threats of colonization nearby, close to Japan, ranging from peninsula and some parts in the continents. That was the cartoon. This is the cartoon describing the situation at the beginning of the 20th century or at the end of 19th century. The very big octopus harassing Chinese man, and Japanese are watching the situation very carefully in order to protect itself at the right moment before it becomes too late. When the Russo-Japanese War took place, the actual battlefields were only around the peninsula or the continent. That is very strange, but it indicates the clear-cut goal of the war of Japanese. Japanese never intended to invade the Russian territory. Although they made some nuanced offensive operations, but main battles were only observed in this area. Why? Because of the plan, clear-cut understanding of the goal of the war. When they felt that they had cleared, they had eliminated more or less actual military threats around the area where Japanese found vital national interests, and then they asked the Americans to intervene for the ceasefire. Japanese were prepared very well, in the sense that Japan made an alliance with Great Britain, where they had sphere of influence in Southeast Asia. Americans shared the same interest against Russian expansion. So they had asked, even before the war, to mediate the ceasefire when things are ripe. And then after Japan made victories over the main land battlefields as well as the sea battlefields, maritime battles, and then Japanese asked the Americans to mediate the ceasefire. And there was a lot of talk, but in the end, the Japanese achieved the fundamental goal to clear the threat of colonization near Japanese territory. That means that they had already almost like achieved the fundamental goal of the first round of peace building. And then Japan began to worry about the future. What could be the next step? What could be the next goal of Japan? It seems that there is no Western power trying to invade and colonize Japan, because Japan was perceived as one of the powers, and then it would be very difficult to invade and decolonize Japan. So no visible threat of colonization anymore. And then Japan began to tends to lose sight after the almost like achievement of the first round of peace building. Americans and British began to worry about the Japanese expansionism after Russian expansionism, because the Japanese did not abandon the idea of expanding the sphere of influence in the continent, even after they eliminated the Western powers' influence. Like Japanese annexed the Korea after they eliminated any other threats. They would say that there was no other option to keep the peninsula safe for Japan, but in the end, anyway, Japan annexed the peninsula. And then at the time of the First World War, after the Russian Revolution, they made significant military intervention in Siberia, and more than the size that they predicted, they declared to other powers, and they remained in the continent for a very long period of time, showing very ambitious ideas to keep the sphere of influence of Japan in the continent. And now Americans and the British began to worry about Japanese moves, try to harass Japan, and Japanese military leaders began to worry about Americans instead of keeping the alliance with the British and the good relationships with Americans. And then in a short period of time, Japan lost the alliance mechanism of the British, and then had a very bad relationship with the Americans. And instead, they continued to expand in the continent, as if Japan became one land power instead of just a sea power as an island power. So the Circled areas in circles, are the territory Japan obtained after the Russo-Japanese War. Very visible expansion through First World War, another war against China and against British and Americans. In domestic society, even though unity was made, actual situation was not so simple. Regional development gap was visible, like northern part, which was a stronghold of the traditional samurai government, remained underdeveloped. Some of the brutal governors coming from southwestern provinces were really brutal against people in north, only to wish to get the positions in Tokyo. And they did not pay attention to the miseries of the people in northern part. And then northern part remained very poor. Even human trafficking, starvation, when natural disaster hit northern part, there was no countermeasure against the miseries, the natural disasters. When young military officials attempted coup d'etat in such a situation, especially after the World Depression, they refers to the miseries of the northern people. And then politicians are ignoring miseries of people in the north. Therefore, we wish we would like to have coup d'etat to change the government and so on. These coup d'etat were oppressed, though there was a significant need for further steps to rectify this regional gap. However, the existing military leaders were not competent enough to change policies. They continue the same process, like expansion, strengthening of the state power, and so on. They even asked the northern people to go to Manchuria. Why don't you cultivate Chinese lands if you do not want to remain in the northern part of Japan? In this way, expansion could not stop, and the strengthening of state power to abuse human rights did not stop. Apparently, the initial positive thing became very bad, negative. I would like to introduce this a bit more narrative related to contemporary stories in this way. Japanese-British alliance mechanism was understood to be in line with the Halford Mackinder's geopolitical theory. Heartland theory means that pivot area, heartland, at the center of the Eurasian continent, they have very special geographical conditions. Because of Antarctic, no major river leading them to the ocean or non-frozen ports and so on. Therefore, they are destined to expand. Island countries are therefore destined to contain the expansion of heartland power because they don't occupy the large areas of the continent. However, they would like to keep the access points. Otherwise, they become very marginal islanders. And their dream of promoting a worldwide trade will be lost if they do not have any access points on the continents. This structure is very much a typical Mackinder-style geopolitical theory. And Anglo-American British alliance in the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century to contain Russian expansion was really in line with Mackinder's theory, which published these articles really at the beginning of the 20th century. Germans did not like the idea of Mackinder. So they had a different kind of geopolitical theory, propagated the Karl Haushofer. Haushofer divided the world into several zones, like 4 zones, and each zone has its own hegemon, with its hegemon's sphere of influence. When the hegemons recognize the spheres of influence of other hegemons mutually, and then the world may achieve relative stability. No rights of small countries, but sphere of influence recognitions among great powers. And Adolf Hitler liked the idea of Haushofer. His idea of Lebensraum came from Haushofer. Haushofer advocated the German-Japanese alliance. in order to confront the Soviet and then Monroe Doctrine sphere in the Western Hemisphere. Military leaders who had problems with the badly deteriorating relationship with the British and Americans liked the idea of Haushofer. So Haushofer became very popular in the 1930s in Japan because of this political move. And Latin realm as well as Great East Asia, co-prosperity sphere was the other application of Haushofer-style geopolitical theory. We could refer to people like Alexander Dugin, Eurasianism in the contemporary sense, as a contemporary version of the Haushofer-style continental theory of geopolitics. Japanese liked it in the 1930s and 1940s and became severely defeated. So now we don't like it. We continue to try to like the different theory of geopolitics derived from Halford Mackinder, Anglo-American style geopolitical theory, with the scenes of heavy defeat. So when they came up with a new plan after they analyzed new problems with new sets of new policies, and then they introduced new policies like, what is this misery after the Second World War? Well, failure of imperial expansionism, abuse of excessive state power. Why did we have this problem? Well, because no sustainable external political policies, no sustainable external economic policies, and no lack of the sound domestic constitutional system, domestic policies. And then if so, Japanese have to introduce new measures to rectify these problems. And constitutional reform, security reform, sector reform, reform of the economic system, once again, but in different ways to achieve different goals. I cannot afford to go into all these points, but I would like to highlight the US-Japan alliance mechanism, which is very strange. United States defeated Japan and even dropped the atomic bomb. And that is the story of Hiroshima. And we have very mixed feeling. Some of them are still very antagonistic toward Americans and so on. But at the policy level, leaders try to persuade the Japanese people of the validity of Japan-US alliance mechanism. In many ways, they did so, but at a certain point, the geopolitical theory comes in. We, island country, have to cope with these alliance mechanisms in this way. Many antagonistic people, terrorism, hostage crisis, hijacking, all these took place in Japan. And then it took them like 2-3 decades to be convinced of the validity of reconstruction plans of leaders after the Second World War. But now people are convinced, although there are many problems still now. I would like to highlight this external relationship issue. In Europe, Americans introduced collective self-defense mechanism in order to contain expansion of continental powers. And sea areas expanded. Actually, now we have a North Atlantic Treaty Organization mechanism in most of the part of Europe. In Asia, Oceania, we have so-called hub and spokes mechanism. A different system, but the same idea. Together, we confront the threats and contain the expansion of continental powers and the dominance of one single power in the continent. We have in Asia a so-called One Belt, One Road initiative, and they are stretching toward Europe, through Asia, South Asia, and so on. And now other countries like Japan and States, US, Australia, and inviting India, we talk about free and open Indo-Pacific. All these are understood to be in line with geopolitical theories. I'm sorry that my circles moved. I wanted to highlight when I transformed this version into the presentation version. I wanted to highlight the peninsula, Korean Peninsula, where the Korean War took place, Indochina Peninsula, where the Vietnam War took place, And Afghanistan and Iran, the turmoil being involved by U.S., it's around the Indian Peninsula, but India itself is very much a strong country. And Arabian Peninsula, all these are the so-called bridgeheads in the theory of geopolitics of Halford Mackinder, where the confrontations between sea powers and the land powers are very significant. What is Europe? Mackinder said Eastern Europe is so crucial. Why? Because of some conditions, but in this context, Europe is like a peninsula from one perspective. If Black Sea is connected to the Mediterranean Sea, stretching toward the Atlantic Ocean as well as Indian Ocean through the Suez. If Black Sea is understood to be like that, all the coastal areas appears to be the coastal areas of a peninsula that could be called the European Peninsula. The bottom of this peninsula is Eastern Europe, so this is a very much hot confrontational area. So that is the understanding of Mackinder's theory, and then it is related to our policies in our world. I would like to touch upon Hiroshima very briefly, but I will try to do so. The narrative is very simple. Hiroshima is a local city of Japan, so it experienced 2 stages of peace building as a national country. Japan experienced the same story. At the first round, the first governor, Mr. Sanda, introduced policies to reconstruct Hiroshima, where some samurai governments, forces, and revolutionary people had confrontations. Problems, poverty, revolts by samurai, domestic disunity. So, as a governor of a local province, Mr. Sanda, who came from a revolutionary province, and then communicating with his friends in Tokyo, revolutionary guys, he had a mission to achieve the goal, which in Hiroshima, which resonates with the overall national goal coming from Tokyo. Eliminating these problems visible in Hiroshima as well as some other points in Japan by promoting industries. He introduced local context measures to achieve this goal, like in order to tackle and overcome these problems like the poverty of farmers and the revolts by samurai disarmed people. Well, he wanted to promote industries. In order to promote industries, he decided to introduce port infrastructure and expansion of agricultural areas. And this is a contemporary Hiroshima's city, and then a G7 summit meeting took place at the edge of the southern part, the bottom of this picture, coastal area, Hiroshima port area. But this entire port was the creation of Miss Governor Sanda. Moto Ujina area, where the G7 summit meeting took place, it was really an island in the Setonaikan Inner Sea. The land area expanded dramatically from the middle point of the river point that was part of the sea until the end of the 19th century. Sanda created the entire land for that purpose by getting huge loans from his friends in Tokyo, the conglomerate guys, the rich guys. But his project was apparent failure. Newly created land was not suitable for agricultural activities. So ex-soldiers, poor farmers, all of them complained. And Sanda was sacked, removed from Hiroshima to another point. And the Hiroshima prefecture was left behind with huge amount of debts. But accidentally, when the Sino-Japanese War took place, central government paid attention to Hiroshima, where the railway system was introduced as the western edge of the Japanese railway system. 5 kilometers between the port center created and the railway station in 2 weeks. National government constructed a short railway so that Hiroshima port was recognized as the access point to the battlefields in the continent. Military headquarters, national parliament, and the emperor came to Hiroshima to stay there for 1.5 years to direct war situations. Hiroshima became Western military capital all of a sudden. Standard was later awarded by the development of the accidental events. So Hiroshima, before the Second World War, was a military capital in Western Japan. Even when the Russo-Japanese War took place, soldiers, military equipment went to Hiroshima first. And then through Ujina port, Hiroshima port, all of them went to the continent, the battlefields. This pattern was very much fixed, established throughout the history of Japan up to the Second World War because of the legacy of Hiroshima. Industries were promoted as a result to sell goods to soldiers, and the military infrastructure industries flourished as well. Many big, large warships were created in Hiroshima or near Hiroshima. Hiroshima understood the problems at the local level and then came up with ideas to overcome the problems with the new policies at the local level. Initially, governor failed, but by accident, he achieved the goal he wanted to achieve. Very interesting story. But as a result, a strange city called the Western military capital of Japan appeared in Hiroshima. This became the target of the attack by the United States, and it was destroyed completely. It was a destruction of the physical existence of Hiroshima as well as psychological existence, because Hiroshima reconstructed itself after the revolution in the 19th century as a military capital, and there was no other identity in this city. So people had to ask a question: is it really feasible to reconstruct Hiroshima physically as well as mentally? Some projects were introduced because many people fled. Many people abandoned Hiroshima, but some other people remained because of the commitment, attachment to ancestors' lands and so on. But the Hiroshima city office, prefectural office were able to introduce only tiny projects with a tiny amount of money to feed the people one by one day and another day, but there was no long-term plan. Very bad. It takes a great amount of time to reconstruct such a city in such a difficult time. That was a clear recognition. Somebody must be very courageous to say that. Because it is important, if it takes a time, people need the vision at the beginning. They sense that they are moving forward. They are moving in the right direction. Otherwise, people are very swift in abandoning the cities as well as any other ideas about the reconstruction. Leaders had to analyze the problems, and in the first place, they had to give the vision. The number one guy among such leaders was the first democratically elected mayor of Hiroshima, Mr. Hamai. He is the architect of the entire process of making Hiroshima a peace memorial city. It is just his idea in a way. When his predecessors asked for the help, he was rejected by many sources like national parliamentarians as well as Americans. When Hamai approached National Diet members as well as American military officials, saying that he did not need money. He needed the spiritual support for the idea of making Hiroshima a peace memorial city. Everyone loved the idea. And then legislation was made and many projects were introduced, and then in direct manner, Hamai obtained the budget too. It was not very easy, and when he organized the ceremony for peace and so on, ordinary citizens complained. What the hell are you talking about? There's no peace in this city. Give us food, give us houses, give us jobs. Instead of your lectures about the peaceful city or something like that. It's a festival. It doesn't make any sense for many people. But he had to visualize the vision. It took a while. When he introduced the big road construction plan, people complained again. What the hell are you doing? We never said that we needed a road. Why are you constructing a road? There was a rumor at the time. Mr. Hamai had a plan, secret plan, but he cannot disclose it. The big road is actually an airport runway. We need it at some point in order to attack Americans. But the mayor could not disclose this idea, so he is pretending that it was like an airport the road. And there are many turmoils or problems, confrontations like that, but many political moves in order to achieve the goal. Legacies of peace education without roofs, peace transformation of military industry existing in Hiroshima. Let's say that Matsuda, the Hiroshima local automobile company, it used to be a weapon producing company. And then some of the factories remained because of small mountains. They held the workshops on what to do with the skilled laborers. They decided to construct a three-wheel mobile for less rich people. And in the end, there was no buyer of weapons. Molten, the worldwide football or sports goods producing companies, it used to be a rubber part weapon producing company. And they held workshops among themselves, the survivors, what to do. They discussed what to do. And they decided to produce sports goods by utilizing their skills to handle rubber. Why? Because many people come back from battlefields and there will be more children. No matter how poor they are, they would like to amuse children. They would like to let the children enjoy themselves with the sports. If they are not rich enough, they love to have a ball. And then their insight was correct. And then Molten became very much big because of this insight. So many local stories like that, many local city-oriented reconstruction ideas. But the point is that even these small stories were in tune with national policies too. There was no fundamental contradictions, although there was great room for coordination, consultations, and so on. So in this way, Japan achieved its somewhat current status. Once again, I said that I'm talking about these stories not because I say that some people should follow the examples of Japan or Hiroshima, because there's no need to follow other guys' cases. Simply because each of us has our own, each country has its own distinctive context. So no two identical cases of peace building or reconstruction. However, although because of that, we continue to learn as many samples as possible in order to get nice insights and nice ideas or lessons, severe lessons in the way. And then we would like to enrich our plan, our attempt of a new round of peace building is in the future. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for exceeding the time given to me. But now I would like to stop my talk and then ask for your questions or comments. Questions are in YouTube chat, so let me have time to look at it. There are so many. Okay. Let me read them because I haven't seen them yet. So while reading, I try to understand them. Is your peace-building model universal? Does it matter who builds peace, the nation of the vanquished or the nation of the victors? Well, I said that again, because this is the first question. This question might have been made before I emphasized it. No two identical cases. So you don't have to follow. No universal model. However, if so, what we can do is to learn as many lessons as possible in order to enrich the content of our new case. So I only hope that Japan or Hiroshima could provide one or two of such cases, samples. And I highlighted that Japan and Ukraine are different countries with different conditions. However, some of the visible similarities or some hidden similarities or any stimulating points I really would like to learn from you. Vanquished or the vanquished or the nation. I'm not sure how I should get engaged with this. The threat of expansion of the other power could have been shared by Ukrainians and Japanese at some point. Japanese tried to prepare for it, and it prevented itself from being colonized or being occupied. But after that, it was under occupation with the former allies. That was very, very sarcastic, ironical, but it happened. How did it happen? I made some suggestions by referring to geopolitical theories. At least Japan is convinced of the lesson they felt that they had learned through the process of the Second World War. At this moment, Japanese policy toward the Ukraine is quite visible, quite clear. We are not so much clear on other policies. What about our policy toward Myanmar, China, Korea? And these policies may be a little bit more complicated or less clear. But our policy in tune with other G7 countries toward Ukraine, I hope is clear enough, although we are prohibited by our historical context and the legal constraints, like we are not able to export lethal weapons. We are able to change laws. Some Diet members are talking about changing the law, but it's a very big move. So to say the least, it cannot be changed in 1 month or several months. But still, it's a significant change that we are debating it. But still now, we haven't changed the law, so we are not able to export lethal weapons. But compared to some other cases, some other Asian countries, or most Asian countries, our policy is clear. I would say because of the lesson we felt we had learned at the time of the Second World War. That is the context of Japanese policy. How are you going to apply this Japanese lesson learned in other contexts? I really would like to discuss it with you instead of giving you some advanced observations in European, Black Sea, Ukrainian context right now. The next question, were there any international collaborations or partnerships that played a significant role in the process of rebuilding Hiroshima and fostering peace? Yes, of course. I have already made it, I hope, somewhat clear from the middle of my presentation. In order to confront the Western colonizing powers, there was a major threat in the first round of peace building in Japan. They identified Russian southward expansion as a major threat. But they were not able to confront all the Western powers, even though it was Americans who sent warships to Japan first. Japan did so much of diplomatic efforts to make a good relationship with the British and Americans, recognizing them as other sea powers, sharing the same concerns of continental power expanding from the bottom of the continent. And then Russo-Japanese War consequence was achievement of this insight. As long as our understanding of our history is concerned. But then Japan began to deviate. And then lost the sight. And then people like Karl Haushofer tried to attract the Japanese for the sake of his own geopolitical theory. And land force, military leaders in the ground force of Imperial Japan were actually attracted, and some other military powers. Military leaders were attracted and consolidated the Japan-German alliance mechanism against other sea powers. And then it did not work. Rather, it worked miserably. So now we've been investing so much in making an alliance system with other sea powers, or alliance mechanism of our most important ally, which is at this moment the United States. Why United States? Well, because of our insight into and recognition of lessons in history. Because we understood this to be most reasonable and most logical in our national interest, and then we make so much effort in keeping this policy for the last 78 years. When the Hamai, even at the local city level, which was bound by Americans, Mayor recognized Americans as a stakeholder, key important stakeholder. So in addition to National Diet member, I approached the Supreme Commander, Douglas Marcus at the office to persuade him of the validity of making Hiroshima so-called Peace Memorial City. And as a result, President Obama, President Biden paid visits to Hiroshima, looking at the monument created by Mayor Hamai at the center of the Memorial Park, which was constructed in the center of the city, entire city. The monument says that we shall never repeat the mistake. Perhaps right-wing people vandalized this monument many times, saying that it was not the Japanese. It was not we who made a mistake. It was Americans and so on. But in order to consolidate these supporters among Americans stretching toward President Biden and President Obama, let's say, Mr. Mayor Hamai wanted to create the memory of Hiroshima as worldwide human being level memory. And then our citizens of Hiroshima at this moment are now more or less confident enough of this, validity of the path Hamai created. Against the invasion, meaning that against the policy of Imperial Japan, so many people are rather more confrontational toward Imperial Japan. Many other people, right-wing people, are confrontational toward American. How to make a balance, how to make a tune, harmony among these people. It was not an easy process, but Hamai did it. And then we get the legacy of Hiroshima at this moment. Third question, this lecture, thanks to organizers, appreciation. Thank you very much indeed for very kind words. Every case is unique, but perhaps with a lot of cases of reconstruction, study future rebuild or destroy the Ukrainian circuit, universal procedure for future can be made. Yes, I'm very much glad because Japan is not irrelevant. So if Ukrainians find it interesting to study Japanese history, we are so much pleased. JICA has a so-called JICA Chair Initiative. They are sponsoring many lecture series throughout the world. I went to Gaza, Palestine in March before I went to Kyiv. And then delivered a lecture at the two universities in Palestine as part of a JICA Chair Initiative. Their standpoint is almost like the mines. Well, we never pretend that people should follow Japan's case, but only if you can find something interesting, stimulating in the history of some other cases, including Japan, we will be very pleased. So we will offer some resources so that you can meaningfully do it. Having all said that, if I go back to real research on peace-building issues, conflict analysis, I'm very much enthusiastically interested in studying, discussing other cases in contemporary world, as well as some recent cases in Europe. Let's say when President Zelensky referred to the idea of no-fly zone, it is apparent that he was influenced by the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's his generation. What is the consequence of Bosnia? We need to know. It's very highly relevant in many ways, at the intellectual level, as well as the policy, physical level too. What is the situation of Kosovo in 2023? Looking at their own history and the situation of Ukraine right now, so many complicated as well as deep questions behind this fundamental big question. We should be able to spend so much time discussing these issues. If I can do it with researchers in Ukraine, I will be so much happy to do that. Let's say other major stakeholders like NATO countries, G7 countries, they have their own influential cases. They have their lessons in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is completely irrelevant to Ukraine, but it is relevant through many stakeholders. They have very vivid memory of Afghanistan before they come to Ukraine. So all these combined, we need to come up with a plan of peace building in Ukraine. Of course, looking at the history of collective self-defense, Kyiv Security Pact, what we mean by security guarantees in a contemporary context or European security history, and then there are a lot of things we discuss. In addition, hopefully, to the cases of reconstruction, peace building in other countries. Next question. Do you reckon that a war like the one in Ukraine could happen in East Asia? China and Russia are increasing military collaboration near Japan amid 50 years of normalization of Sino-Japanese relations. Well, of course. And this observation has been discussed in many circles in Europe. And in Singapore, well, the Shangri-La conference is taking place, WWS conference. At this moment, or it's over, yesterday or today. But they continue to refer to the so-called comparison or parallel relationship between Ukraine and East Asia. When Prime Minister Kishida went to Kyiv to meet President Zelensky, and they issued a joint statement. In that joint statement, they emphasized the idea that so-called Euro-Atlantic security is intrinsically linked to Indo-Pacific security. Well, through Bosporus Channel, Black Sea is connected to Indian Ocean, well, visibly speaking. So yes, of course it is linked, but more deeply, more policy-oriented manners, how is it so? We need to discuss it. NATO countries share this observation, the linkage of security in Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific. But there's a lot that we need to deepen, we need to clarify. Policymakers' discussions as well as academic discussions ought to be organized more intensively in the near future, right now. Thank you very much for the question. Are in Japan the political and the social forces that are not oriented towards peace or the war? Right now, I think, I guess so. Is there danger and from whom, where Japan or military aggression? I hope that there is no great probability, but if you say that there are some people, whether or not there are some people who are advocating very dangerous ideas, yes, of course there are. Japan has 120 million people. Our population is going to decrease, but anyway, it's not a tiny country. So with this number of people, there are so many guys, strange guys, crazy guys, or whatever. And then there are some extreme guys too, like advocating military adventurism, advocating imperial Japan style ideology, but they are really tiny minorities. So they don't have any representation in the national diet, for instance. Although some of the diet members may be closer to some ideas, that's a little bit more detailed topics. But it applies to Russo-Ukraine war too. There are some people, not majority, just to count the number. We can count the number because they are very peculiar, outstanding, though they exist. Like almost like advocate of Russian position. Thanks to the government, we do not have any representation in national policy, but 1, 2, 3 national diet members are anti-American figures, and they are talking about the conspiracy theories of deep state in Washington, D.C. or something like that. And then they are de facto pro-Russo forces in Japan right now at this moment. So yes, in order to answer your question, yes, there are some strange people, though at this moment they are minorities. But it could mean that unless we are cautious enough, we might allow them to expand their influence in domestic society. And so we need to continue to organize discussions very carefully, professionally, in a sound, healthy manner. Final question at this moment. Thanks a lot for lecture. A lot of moments in history are highlighted for the first time, and now my understanding of the situation is much more clear. Thank you very much for your very much kind words. I hope my lecture and my engagement with you was not meaningless. I hope it had some meanings, some implications, some lessons, although it is up to us what kind of lessons we would like to take and what kind of aspects of Japanese history we would like to emphasize. It is in the end up to us. I have my own extended version of the idea of history of Japan. If I'm given more time with the Ukrainian audience only, I could navigate the discussion a little bit more differently as an academia, although I made some implications visible in a visible manner by introducing non-Japanese historical figures like Halford Mackinder, Karl Haushofer, and so on, but I only implied those elements very slightly today. But I would like to explore some opportunities of joint research, collaboration with students, researchers in Ukraine, because now I have a very genuine interest in being engaged with Ukraine. When I was in Ukraine, I went to Kyiv as well as Bucha, and then I found attempts of art therapy for children. In 1-2 weeks, we would like to start as a Japanese volunteer group to start crowdfunding to solicit a small amount of money to keep them continue, let them continue the project of art therapy, psychological treatments for children in Bucha. So that was another idea that arose out of my engagement in Ukraine. This is a big issue. I have an interest in some other areas in the world, in Africa and the Middle East and South Asia. These are the major points. These days, very much dramatically in Africa. Africa is very much visibly impacted, influenced by Russian invasion. Because as you know, because of the grain export issue and so on, and support mechanism, support system for Ukraine we always discuss Africa in such a way. But they have many lessons, many organizational memories. So if we are fully knowledgeable about the lessons we observe in Africa, we should be able to make use of these lessons too. Because NATO involvement, EU involvement in peace operations were being conducted in Africa, in addition to Afghanistan. Actual human beings, military officers, civil experts handling security sector reforms and so on, they have their experiences in Africa and Afghanistan. In order to better navigate our conversations, it's not a bad idea to be familiar with African cases as well as Bosnia and Kosovo, where NATO countries made significant interventions. But anyway, with all these ideas, if we can develop our collaboration in the near future, I will be very much happy. And I hope that today's occasion could be one step forward in that direction. And I really thank you very much for the organizers as well as the audience for your wonderful, enthusiastic support as well as engagements. Thank you very much indeed.
Professor Shinoda, we are extremely grateful to your brilliant lecture, to your insights, both in Japan's history and present, and we extremely appreciate how skillfully you've managed to build connections between seemingly faraway nations like Japan, its past and present, and Ukraine, its present and its future. We've learned a lot from your lesson, and thanks for your suggestions, for your ideas to conduct more lessons and seminars to Ukrainian audience, to KPI community, but I'm not sure, but I'm totally sure that the interest in collaboration with you will go beyond the KPI University community. We are extremely grateful to you for supporting Ukraine and contributing to Ukraine's victory. Також хочу подякувати всім учасникам цієї лекції, цієї події за таку активну, проактивну участь і за ваші питання. Щиро дякую і до нових зустрічей. I hope that we'll see you soon with your lectures and presentations.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor and a great pleasure. I would like to thank, my special thanks goes to Pavlo, Professor Fedorchenko Kutuyev, as well as his colleagues at the KIP and the wider audience on this occasion. I thank you very much indeed. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a great day and see you soon.